Dear colleagues, my name is Anna Tsepkova, and it is my pleasure to present you the results of research aimed at analyzing generic literary titles of fictional diaries from Adrian Mole book series written by the British author Sue Townsend. According to Gerard Genet, the term generic is applied to thematic titles which highlight the narrative mode of the text, like, for example, in Bridget Jones's Diary or A Tale of Two Cities. They are opposed to thematic titles, which indicate the content of the text. Among Adrian Mole diaries, there are 3 texts with generic components: The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, True Confessions, and The Lost Diaries. Our research is based on previous studies of the phenomenon of a literary title as the element of text and paratext, as well as interviews, reviews, and literary research on Sue Townsend's fiction. The semiotic analysis of literary titles under consideration is aimed at identifying their indexical, iconic, and symbolic references. The indexical function is revealed by means of direct identification of eponymous reference on the basis of the text. Iconicity of titles is reflected in their adjustment to certain conventions of titling depending on the genre of the text. Genet calls it connotative value, which is expressed in repeating and imitating the patterns characteristic of a certain genre, a literary and historical period, another author's style, or it can be part of the author's own individual paradigm of titles. As for the symbolic value of the title, as Professor Smith says, a name in literature has symbolic meaning insofar as it reflects a thematic interpretation of that literature. Thus, a symbolic title functions as an explicit or implicit representation of the central theme and by themes or conflicts the book touches upon. We will start our analysis with the structure of the 3 generic titles and their indexical meaning. They follow a common pattern with the headword indicating the generic reference, which is accompanied by the attribute and preposition specifying the genre, and the attribute and postposition stating fictional authorship. The optional component is either an opposition, stating the status of the diarist, or a detachment, indicating the temporal reference, which in case of Adrian Mole diaries is either relative, the age of the diarist, or absolute, the date when the diary is written. Thus, such titles cannot be called pure generic, as they include the exponents of the thematic characteristics of the text. The main peculiarity of these titles is their iconic character, as they implicate the author's intention of parodying the long-lasting literary tradition of fictional and documentary diary writing, with sensational secret confessions of celebrities and ordinary people. Let us first consider the most stable component of the titles, the proper name of the eponymous character Adrian Mole. As an index, this proper name represents the unchanging protagonist of the series, who is also the fictional author and narrator from teenage up to middle age. Iconically, this stability echoes Adrian Mole's static personality, which doesn't evolve much within a time span of 26 years, from the first to the last diary. Adrian Mole's sustainability results in a number of symbolic meanings associated with his multiple identities. Thus, Adrian Mole, as a representative of the so-called Generation X, symbolizes search for independence and success, along with search for security, private space, traditional family, the values resulting from financial and psychological instability in the family, caused by social and political crises, like remodeling their welfare state, and others observed by Professor Domingo Izquierdo in his doctoral dissertation. Then Adrian Mole's another identity is as a provincial from the East Midlands with a working class background, symbolizes lost opportunities. He is acutely sensitive to being identified as a provincial, dissatisfied with his boring, uneventful life, envying successful people like his love Pandora and his half-brother Brett. Then Adrian Mole, as a self-taught working-class intellectual with ambitions of a writer, experiences such feelings as loneliness, self-pity. He is underestimated, unpractical, idealistic, short-sighted, and arrogant. Adrian Mole is a symbol of the everyman of modern Britain, as Elizabeth O'Reilly puts it, or at least England, comprises the controversial qualities and behaviors of the English. Relying on the results of Kate Fox's anthropological research on the English character, we point out the following most obvious features Adrian Mole shares with his fellow countrymen: awkwardness, reserve, obsession with privacy, moderation, reflected in conservatism, conformity, fear of change, apathy, focus on security, ordinariness, tendency to compromise, stoicism, class consciousness. Besides Adrian Mole's multiple identities include Sue Townsend herself, who confessed in the interview that she is an Adrian Mole character and his views are her views. Thus, the symbolic interpretation of the eponym can be connected with the idea of giving voice to a group of people representing a certain generation, region, social class, profession, and the country as a whole. The first generic title, The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4, is the title of the first Adrian Mole book, which names its 3 indexical characteristics: the genre, the name of the main character and narrator, and his age. As the exponent of iconicity, the nomination Secret Diary parodies the diary genre, involving the reader in the privacy-breaking game by means of mocking at the genre of the secret diary itself, which actually becomes published. It also mocks at the reader, who acquires the role of an intruder into other people's private lives. And it mocks at the fictional secret diarist himself, who cherishes his dream of becoming a celebrity and anticipates the sensation his diary will produce if made public. The symbolism of a secret diary is connected with loneliness of its teenage author, as it serves as a substitute and personification of a bosom friend and a trusted confidant. Besides the name of the eponymous character, the thematic complement to the generic title includes meticulous details of his age, 13 3/4. This element of the title hints at the psychological issues of growing up and entering the age of early adolescence, which, being titular, is the central theme and conflict of the book, and, metafictionally speaking, the starting point of Adrian's life as a literary character. Symbolically, it is the threshold to reality, a borderline between his silent formative years and the moment when he was given the right and freedom to speak. Moreover, as the genre of the secret diary echoes Sue Townsend's literary career, which started with the secret writing, one of these interpretations can be connected with the author herself, Adrian Mole's voice symbolizing the end of her silent years. The same analogy of giving voice can be applied to other symbolic identities of Adrian Mole, discussed earlier, particularly that of an English teenager from East Midlands working-class family during Margaret Thatcher's early years as Prime Minister. The second generic title, True Confessions of Adrian Mole, Margaret Hilda Roberts, and Susan Lilian Townsend, is the third book in a series, a collected volume by 3 contributors, including Adrian Mole, the author herself, and a certain Margaret Hilda Roberts, whose identity as Margaret Thatcher is clear for the reader. However, Sue Townsend, who was the Prime Minister's severe critic, uses her maiden name to create the effect of failed identification in the introductory notes on the contributors, where she sarcastically notes that nothing, unfortunately, is known about Margaret Hilda Roberts or what became of her. Iconicity of the title is reflected on the level of form in its similarity to other titles of the series, as well as in similarity between the elements constituting the title. First of all, the previous and the present generic title are connected by relations of contrast and similarity at the same time. Unlike the secret diary, the True Confessions imply the opposite mode of narration, in which authors reveal some sensational and provocative facts from their lives and at their own will. However, the subtitle of Margaret Hilda Roberts' contribution, The Secret Diary of Margaret Hilda Roberts, aged 14 1/4, implies private confessions and imitates the Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4, thus functioning iconically and encouraging a comparison between the two diarists of approximately the same age. Secondly, the metafictional game is reflected in the juxtaposition of the contributors' names within the collective title of the book. On the structural level, copulative coordination and the same nomination pattern imply homogeneity, quality, and similarity of the reference. However, the comparison of the eponymous reference demonstrates not only similarities but also differences, which is typical of parody. The table sums up comparative analysis based on binary opposition of their qualities. It also visualizes the fact that the author is penetrated into both of her characters, occupying the intermediary buffering position in this threefold relationship, appearing as a meta character, as Professor Domingo Esquerdo puts it. Besides, the scheme illustrates that the worlds of Adrian Mole and Margaret Roberts stand in opposition to each other, which is symbolic of the antagonistic nature of their relationships, based on the fundamental multi-layer clash between the successful and powerful ruling circles, whose philosophy of pragmatism proved right, and the failed working classes who fell victims to this philosophy. In this respect, Adrian Mole's poem about Margaret Thatcher is highly significant. Do you weep, Mrs. Thatcher? Do you weep? Do you wake, Mrs. Thatcher, in your sleep? Do you wake with 3 million on your brain? Are you sorry that they'll never work again? When you're dressed in your blue, do you see the waiting queue? However, the iconic connotations of similarity have reciprocal impact on the eponymous characters, especially on Mole and Roberts, who turn out to share some qualities, which Sue Townsend, however, doesn't approve of. These qualities include political ambitions. Adrian Mole's claims to a political career and his own party are mocked at by means of his comparing himself with Margaret Thatcher. The author uses the same device to satirize Robert's teenage ambitions, encouraged by a fortune teller's predictions that she will be the mightiest in the land one day. The extract where young Margaret secretly tries on the crown and the ermine robe is full of sarcasm. Other qualities that they share are self-importance and snobbery of self-proclaimed geniuses, contempt for working class people, and traditional male attitudes to gender roles in society with women as housewives. Projecting qualities result in blurred boundaries between fiction and reality, and in shifting the status of the three contributors according to the scale unknown, famous, infamous. In notes to the contributors, by means of bitter irony, the author shifts the status of Margaret Thatcher, the notorious prime minister, to obscurity, in the style of pseudo-mystification reminiscent of Washington Irving's Dietrich Knickerbocker technique. By means of mock confessions about her plagiarism, Sue Townsend herself fosters Adrian Mole's transformation from an unpublished unknown writer to a real-life celebrity, simultaneously shifting the imaginary Susan Townsend from fame to notoriety, which she sarcastically defines as a shift from notoriety to obscurity. The third generic title, The Lost Diaries of Adrian Mole, is a midquel which fills in the gap in Adrian Mole's life between 1999 and 2001, after the house he inherited and occupied with his two sons is burned in the Cappuccino years, and before his elder son Glenn joins up and is sent to Iraq in Adrian Mole and the Weapons of Mass Destruction. In this book, the author again resorts to the technique of discovering the lost diaries, which in their iconic meaning provoke expectations of a sensation and reaffirm Adrian Mole's metafictional status of a celebrity, despite the fact that on the intratextual level, the character remains unpublished and unsuccessful because of the fictional Sue Townsend. Besides, the title highlights the concept of loss, which can be interpreted directly and symbolically as the clue to major themes and the general tone of the narrative. The eponymous time indicators contribute to the symbolism of the title as well. The years 1999-2001 are reminiscent of worldwide and specifically British events which have had a major impact domestically and internationally. As a threshold between two millennia, it symbolizes the beginning of the new era in human history, which excited both pessimistic expectations about the end of the world and optimistic expectations about one big, happy, cappuccino-colored family. These dates also remind us about the tragedy of 1911, which caused human losses and led to the war on terrorism. For an average Adrian Mole citizen, it resulted in new anxieties and fear of becoming the victim of terrorism or the victim on the war on terrorism, with the loss of privacy or even loss of freedom when Adrian Mole is arrested under Blunkett's anti-terrorist bill. As Josh Lacey puts it, historians will mark this as the moment at which Britain trembled on the verge of becoming a police state. If Adrian Mole can be thrown in prison on suspicion of terrorism, who else is safe? This period is also connected with the 2 later years of Tony Blair's first term in office and the second victory of New Labour in the 2001 general elections. The book is published in 2008, a year after Tony Blair's resignation. Thus, Townsend takes the opportunity to look back on the early years of his rule and estimate the value of his promises. Back in the Cappuccino years, Adrian Mole, as well as his many countrymen, was inspired and blinded by the new Labour rhetoric. However, when the next period in Adrian's life, depicted in the Lost Diaries, shows losses rather than gains. In the aftermath of his loss of home in the previous book, he is a homeless, jobless single father. Symbolically, the Lost Diaries can be associated with the lost years, wasted years, hard times, covering one of the most miserable and humiliating periods in his life, when he had to move to the council estate with his 2 sons. To sum up the motive of failure, the author, in unison with her character, writes the artist's manifesto, stating, how tragic would be the loss to the nation if a great work of mine were to remain unwritten due to the banal necessity of clocking on as an assistant warehouseman. Thus, the motive of failure becomes eponymous in this book, affecting the characters, places, events, and the period highlighted in the title. For Adrian Mole, as the representative of Generation X, a provincial man from a working-class family, an intellectual, and finally, every Englishman, it is the period of minor and major losses in personal, professional, economic, and political spheres. Coming to the conclusion, applying the semiotic approach, the generic titles, we interpret them both as textual elements and as reference to extra-textual phenomena. The 3 titles under analysis are not purely generic, as they include the elements which are the clues to the thematic aspects of the narratives. Thus, besides indicating the factual information, the titles in their iconic functions signal the narrative mode of parody and pastiche. Imitating the diary genre, the author plays with fictionality and reality, secrecy and publicity. In their symbolic function, the titles allude to social, political, cultural, psychological issues associated with the indicated period of time and the eponymous personality. The eponymous character's name is the most stable component in all diaries of a series, though this stability is not only nominal but also iconic, connected with Adrian Mole's unchanging outlook, which produces the effect of a trap in time and even in space. In the micro context of the title, All Adrian Mole's identities are specified according to the leading motif of the generic element. The secret diary explicates the motives of secrecy, privacy, intimacy, introversion, loneliness, representing in itself a paradoxical form. Though the diary is not meant to be made public, it gets published both in fiction and in reality. True confessions explicate the motives of uncovering the secret, anticipating sensational revelations, publicity, popularity, or infamy. By juxtaposing Adrian Mole with the future Prime Minister and herself, Townsend shows contrast and similarity between the three eponymous diarists, thus extending Adrian Mole's identities and creating a unique antithetic and oxymoronic character, an unknown celebrity, an unreliable reliable narrator, an unsuccessful successful author, an unpublished published author of a secret public diary. The lost diaries explicate the motives of loss and failure, which are further revealed with regard to personal misfortunes, social and economic and political crisis on the threshold of the 21st century. To sum up, the first book in a series can be regarded as the setting and the springboard to Adrian Mole's 26-year-long story, whereas the two other books, bearing generic titles, perform the function of gap fillers between more substantial periods in Adrian Mole's life, labeled in the thematic titles of the remaining diaries, the latter being the prospect of our research. On these slides, you can see the references, and I thank you for your attention.
Well, all I can say is I wish I had read those books so that I could follow along better. But the symbolism of the name Adrian Mole, I think, is delightful and undiscovered writer.
Yeah.
The imagery is really neat. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the books themselves are really rich in proper names of all types, very, very densely populated by onomastic units. And well, each of the books deserves a deep insight, and it's pretty difficult to retell it because of the diary style. But yeah, it's full of humor and sarcasm, which is reflected in the onomastic features as well.
Well, I enjoy the sarcasm.
Yeah. That's what Sue Townsend is very good at.
Thank you, Anna. I would second what Grant just said. It was fascinating to listen to you, and it makes me wish I had read those. The way you have peeled back the layers in them and then spliced it all back together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.